so that people can understand that there are issues and that we're trying to raise those issues and make sure that people are more conscious of what they're getting into. I want to start, there was a letter in the Caledonian Record dated February 6th. And the person who wrote it may well be in this room, and if he is, I want to thank him. Because he listed here 7 items in the letter. It starts out, some wind opponents are making a lot of claims about kingdom community wind, but about ignoring important truths. Those 7 questions, I'm just going to go through them really quickly, of which 4 of them, I fully expect to answer tonight, and I'm hoping, or respond to at least tonight. The others, I'm hoping that you'll get a response to every single one of these, because it's very important. First one is, they, the wind opponents, claim wind doesn't work, that it's just a play for subsidies. And it says, but then goes on to say that the subsidies are to be used to apply to reducing costs of electricity. Thus, any subsidies received by GMP will be passed on to VEC customers in the form of lower priced electricity. Second one, they claim no benefit outside of Lowell, ignoring the benefits to the region of pumping tens of millions of dollars into the local economy. And then says, over the life of the contract, it says, in providing VEC with a long-term source of stably priced power, which over the life of the contract, according to a recent co-op life, VEC expects to be cheaper than any other power source available. Okay? I'd like to address that. They say wind is bad and Vermont hydro good, ignoring the fact that their operational characteristics are comparable. They say wind has never shut down a fossil fuel generator, but ignore the fact that electricity load is constantly fluctuating, and that natural gas generators are routinely switched on and off as needed. Those are the questions I want to respond to tonight. The others are, they say turbines are very noisy. From time to time, again, people observe they are not. The newest claim is that turbine sounds are bad for our health, ignoring the fact that there's nothing unique about sounds turbines produce. And finally, they say turbines negatively impact property values. Okay. So if we could, I'm going to go through a bunch of slides. And my intent in the first set of slides is to paint a macro picture of energy policy in this country today as it applies to renewables and as it applies specifically to wind energy. Then I'm going to bring it down to the New England region and then further down to Vermont. And I want you to keep in mind as we go through this process that project in Lowell that's proposed in the context of this either very macro view and then down. Energy policy goals up until a few years ago in this country, especially here in New England, have been predicated on 5 concepts. We are expecting our electricity generation to meet load. Does everyone know what load is? Load is the amount of electricity we demand. Okay? I'm going to give you some numbers in a few minutes. So, a state like Vermont, in the 6 states of New England, Vermont has the lowest load. You guys consume less electricity than the Seabrook nuclear power plant produces every hour. Where do you think the load centers are in New England? No, Boston. Burlington is nothing compared to Boston. Go to Boston, go to Connecticut, southern Connecticut, go to Hartford, drive by the malls, drive by the buildings, the street lights. The biggest amount of electricity consumed in New England is Boston, and then you get into southern Connecticut. We're looking for efficient, reliable, cost-effective generation. That means we have very expensive electricity here in New England, as it is. But you haven't seen anything until renewable energy gets put online. But our goal has always been low-cost electricity, at least as low as we can keep it. Now, one of the things that contributes to the cost of high cost of electricity is the location of it and how much transmission we have to build to get to it. I'm going to talk to you about that. But the way energy prices are priced in New England, at least, it's called system market design. And that means that we price electricity according to the time of day and time of year that it produces, and according to where it is located. So if I build a power plant, if I build a landfill gas facility in the middle of downtown Boston, that electricity gets a pretty high value at the 2 o'clock in the afternoon in the middle of August, because it's built right. It doesn't get penalized for producing electricity when we don't need it. It produces it when we need it. And it doesn't get penalized for producing electricity out in the middle of nowhere, Vermont. It's getting produced right where the load center is, so we don't have to assume a transmission cost, a high transmission cost associated with it. So the intent is to build projects as close to load as possible to minimize the transmission cost, and to build projects that are capable of meeting load in the very time of day, time of year when we most need it. When do we most need electricity? When is the highest load in the New England area? Does anyone know?
7 p.m.
No? Not
7 p.m.
Not winter.
Saturday morning?
2 o'clock in the afternoon in August. About 10 or 12 years ago, New England had been what was called a winter peaking region. That's because we were a lot of people were heating their homes with electricity. We got off electricity for heating our homes. But what do we do in the middle of summer? We cool our homes. We crank the AC. So our electricity needs are the highest in the middle of the summer and the middle of the afternoon. Our electricity costs are the lowest, or around the lowest, in the middle of the night, in the middle of the winter. Unless we're in an extreme cold snap, so we won't go out and talk about that. Still, it's lower than summer. I want to talk about wind's profile when it comes to meeting load. Greenhouse gas emissions. That's the new guy in town over the past few years. We have Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, cap and trade on CO2. We also have cap and trade on NOx and SOx, nitric oxide, SO2. We want to have a clean environment in terms of greenhouse. Stable, secure, sustained fuel sources, okay? We hear about wind. Oh, wind's, well, we heard that in the question. We'll have stably priced electricity from wind. And then we want environmentally sensitive siting and generation. Now, if you were to read this gentleman's letter, he would argue that at least, I think we're meeting the last three. I don't know if I saw anything much about meeting peak load. And I don't think he said much about efficient, reliable, cost-effective, except to the extent that he said it would be stable pricing. Maybe he did talk about that. Okay, so we go to the next slide. Quick thing, what's going on in the United States right now? We have, and also at the state level, we have tools in place that are encouraging renewable development. Why do we want renewables? When NREL was created, the National Renewable Energy Lab was created back in the 70s under the Carter administration. When we went through our first series of gas lines during the 70s, there was a big push at the time to go into renewables. We put a number of subsidies in place that encouraged it. We got a burst of wind development in California at that time. Those subsidies, what happened was energy prices dropped, everyone lost their interest, it kind of died down. And then it came back again. I don't know if anyone realized it came back largely because of Enron, but these subsidies were put in place to encourage it again over concerns about global warming. And this was the middle line in there, the federal production tax credit put in place in 1992. That allows a tax credit for every kilowatt hour of electricity generated from a renewable. The state renewable portfolio standard, 5 states out of the 6 in New England have a renewable portfolio standard which requires by state law that a certain amount of electricity sold retail into the state has to come from renewables, and they classify what those renewables are.